Welcome back to Hidden Secrets. Another story, another mystery. Let's begin. For 10 years, I carried heavy trays, wiped grease off marble tables, and smiled while the owner called me worthless trash in front of the lunch rush. Yesterday, he fired me and threw a handful of change at my face, screaming that I'd never be more than a servant. He doesn't know that I don't just work here, I own the entire block. My name is Julian Thorne. I'm a structural engineer, a man who lives by blueprints and solid foundations. But 3 days ago, the foundation of my life turned to quicksand. My wife, Clara, had been killed in a tragic hit and run while she was out for her evening jog. The police found her ID in her jacket, her wedding ring on her finger, and that unmistakable birthmark on her wrist. Clara was my soulmate. We had been married for 6 years, living a quiet, beautiful life in the suburbs of Seattle. She was a freelance illustrator, a gentle soul who loved rainy mornings and old jazz records, or so I thought. The day of the funeral was a blur of gray skies and suffocating lily scents. I sat in the front row, numb, staring at the polished mahogany casket. The small gathering of friends whispered their condolences, but something felt off. Clara was an only child. Her parents had passed years ago, so the turnout was small. Then she walked in. She was dressed in vintage black lace, her face hidden behind a thick netting. She didn't approach the pews, she went straight to the casket. I watched her shoulders shake as she let out a guttural, heartbreaking sob. I stood up, intending to comfort this mystery friend, but as I drew closer, a gust of wind from the chapel door caught her veil. I stopped breathing. The woman looking down at the body was the exact image of Clara. Same arched eyebrows, same scattered freckles across the bridge of the nose, same deep emerald eyes. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was a mirror. "Clara?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The woman turned to me, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't speak. She looked at the body in the casket, then at me, and bolted toward the exit. "Wait!" I yelled, stumbling past the mourners. I reached the church steps just as a battered silver sedan screeched away. I stood there, heart hammering against my ribs. I turned back toward the casket. I looked at the woman lying in the satin lining. If the woman who just fled was Clara, then who was I burying? I went back to the house that night, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I went into Clara's studio, a room I usually treated as a sanctuary. I started opening drawers I had never touched. Beneath a stack of watercolor paper, I found a locked metal box. I pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside were 2 passports. One was for Clara Thorne, the other was for a woman named Elena Vance. The photos were identical, but the stamps were different. Elena Vance had been to places Clara never mentioned: Russia, Turkey, Lebanon. Hidden at the bottom of the box was a folded newspaper clipping from 20 years ago. It was an obituary for a tragic fire in an apartment complex. It listed the survivors as 2 twin girls, separated by the foster care system. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Clara had a twin, a sister she never told me about, but that didn't explain the funeral. If Elena was the one who died, why was she carrying Clara's ID? And if Clara was alive, why was she letting me bury her sister in her name? I spent the next 48 hours like a man possessed. I used my engineering access to track the GPS on our shared car, the one Clara supposedly took to the jogging trail that night. The car hadn't been at the trail. It had been parked at a rundown motel on the edge of the city. I drove there at midnight. I knocked on the door of room 14. The door opened slowly. The woman from the funeral stood there. She wasn't wearing the veil now. She looked exhausted, haunted. She looked at me and didn't try to run. "Julian," she said. It was Clara's voice. "Exactly. Who are you?" I asked, my hand trembling as I held up the 2 passports. "And who did I just put in the ground?" She stepped back, letting me into the dim room. "I'm Clara," she whispered. "The woman in the casket, that was Elena, my sister." "Why did she have your ID? Why did the police say it was you?" Clara sat on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. "Because we traded places, Julian. We've been trading places for years." But this time, it was supposed to be the last time. She was supposed to leave, and I was supposed to stay. But they found her. They were looking for me, and they found her instead. The first twist had landed, but the depth of the deception was only beginning to surface. My wife wasn't an illustrator. She wasn't a gentle soul. She was part of something much darker, and the woman I had been living with for 6 years might not have been the woman I married at all. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap disinfectant. I sat on a plastic chair, staring at the woman who looked exactly like the wife I had just put in the ground. She was shaking, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. And don't you dare lie to me. If you're Clara, why didn't you know about the anniversary? Why did you look at me at the funeral like I was a ghost? She looked up, her emerald eyes, the eyes I had kissed every morning, welling with tears. Because I am Clara, Julian, but I haven't been Clara for 3 months. Elena, she took over in November. The air left my lungs. November, that was 4 months ago. I thought back to Thanksgiving. Clara had been a little quieter then, a little more distant. She said she was stressed about a new illustration project. I had even joked that she was acting like a stranger. God, I was an idiot. We're born into a fire, Julian, she began, her voice trembling. Our parents died in that apartment blaze in '88. We were separated in foster care. I got a stable home in Seattle. Elena got moved from state to state, eventually ending up in Europe. She got involved with people who move money for the wrong kind of organizations. She was a courier, high risk, high reward. She took a shaky breath. 2 years ago, she found me. She showed up at the studio while you were at work. I was terrified, but she was my blood. She told me she was in trouble, that she had lost a shipment of data that belonged to a group called the Vane Syndicate. She needed to disappear. She suggested we switch just for a week so she could clear her trail. And you said yes, I hissed. You let a criminal step into our bed, into our life? I thought I was saving her, Julian, but 1 week turned into a month. Then she started liking my life. Your life. She liked the safety of the suburbs. She liked the boring structural engineer husband. She told me if I didn't keep playing along, she'd tell Vane exactly where I was and let them take me instead. I stood up, pacing the cramped room. So who was I living with since November? Who did I celebrate New Year's with? Who was I planning a future with? That was Elena, Clara sobbed. I was staying in this motel, living off cash she sent me, waiting for her to give me my life back. We were supposed to meet at the park that night to switch back for good. She said she was done, that she had paid off her debts. But she wasn't meeting me to switch, she was being followed. Clara stood up and grabbed my arm. Her touch felt the same, but the energy was different. It was desperate. The hit and run wasn't an accident, Julian. It was an execution. They thought she was me, or they thought I was her. They don't care about the difference. To them, we are just one target. I pulled away, my mind racing through the technicalities. As an engineer, I look for the stress points. The stress point here was the ID. Why did she have your ID? Why was she wearing your wedding ring if you were the one living in the motel? Because she stole them, Clara screamed. She came here an hour before the meeting. She took my ring, my license, my phone. She said it was for security during the transition. She walked out that door looking like Julian Thorne, and 10 minutes later, she was dead on the pavement. I looked at the birthmark on her wrist. It was there. The small, crescent-shaped mark I knew so well, but then I remembered the body in the morgue. The coroner had pointed out that same mark. Twins don't have identical birthmarks, Clara, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Birthmarks aren't genetic, they're random. Clara froze. The sobbing stopped. The room went silent. My sister was a perfectionist, Julian, she said, her voice suddenly cold and devoid of emotion. She didn't just take my name. She had a tattoo artist match the mark perfectly 3 years ago. She wanted to be me, and now she's dead in my place. I looked around the motel room. On the nightstand sat a small, black USB drive. It looked out of place against the wood grain. What's that? I asked, pointing. That's the reason Elena is dead, Clara said. She didn't lose the shipment 2 years ago. She stole it. It's the ledger for every offshore account the Vane Syndicate owns. She was going to use it as a pension, but now they know it's in Seattle and they think I have it. The second twist was hitting me. This wasn't just a story of a sisterly switch. This was a hunt, and I had just spent 3 days publicly mourning the woman they thought was their thief. By burying Clara, I had essentially told the syndicate that their target was gone. But if they saw the real Clara at the funeral, they saw you, I realized, the horror dawning on me. The woman in the veil, they saw your face. They know one of you is still alive. Just as the words left my mouth, the window of the motel room shattered. A red laser dot danced across the peeling wallpaper, searching for a chest to land on. Get down! I tackled Clara to the floor just as a suppressed shot thudded into the headboard. I wasn't just a grieving husband anymore. I was a structural engineer whose life had just been demolished, and the only way to survive was to rebuild the truth, one lie at a time. I grabbed the USB drive in Clara's hand. If you're really my wife, I whispered as we crawled toward the bathroom for cover, you better start acting like the courier your sister was, because we're not just mourning a funeral anymore. We're running from one. The third twist was lurking in the shadows. I didn't tell her that I had already seen the contents of that USB. I had found it in our house a week ago, and the names on that ledger? One of them was mine. We were pressed against the cold tile of the motel bathroom floor, the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Outside, the silence was even more terrifying than the gunshot. The Vane Syndicate didn't send amateurs, they sent ghosts. "Julian, we have to go." Clara hissed, her fingers digging into my arm. "There's a service entrance through the back of the laundry room. If we stay here, we're dead." I looked at the USB drive in my hand. "The laundry room won't save us, Clara. Nothing will, because I know what's on this drive. I didn't find it tonight. I found it a week ago, hidden in the vent of our HVAC system at home." Clara stopped moving. Her eyes darted to the drive, then back to mine. In the dim light of the bathroom, she looked exactly like the woman I'd loved for 6 years, but the fear in her eyes was being replaced by something sharper, something calculating. You opened it," she whispered. "I'm an engineer, Clara. I'm curious by nature," I said, my voice cold. "I saw the offshore accounts. I saw the money laundering for the construction firms in Seattle, and I saw my own name. Julian Thorne, primary consultant for Vane Infrastructure. Why is my name on a criminal ledger, Clara? Why was I the one signing off on the blueprints for their shell company warehouses?" The second shot rang out, shattering the bathroom mirror above us. Glass rained down like diamond dust. I didn't wait for her answer. I grabbed her by the waist and hauled her into the hallway, sprinting toward the rear exit as the motel's fire alarm began to wail. We burst out into the freezing Seattle night, scrambling into my SUV. I floored it, the tires screaming against the asphalt. I didn't head home. I headed toward the construction site of the new Meridian Bridge, the project I'd been overseeing for the last 2 years. "Answer me," I roared, weaving through traffic. "Did you set me up? Was our entire marriage just a cover so the syndicate could have an inside man in the city's engineering department?" Clara was shaking her head, her hair a wild mess around her face. "No, Julian, no. I didn't even know your name was on there until Alina told me. She didn't choose me because I was her sister. She chose me because of who you were. She needed a husband who could sign the permits without asking questions. She was the one who manipulated your firm's contracts. She did it from my studio, using my computer while I was out at the market." "And you just let her?" I asked, my grip tightening on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "I didn't know," she cried. By the time I realized what she was doing, it was too late. She told me if I went to the police, she'd make sure the ledger showed you as the mastermind. She was going to frame you to save herself. That's why we were switching back that night. She was going to take the money and leave us both to take the fall. I slowed the car as we approached the darkened construction site. The massive steel skeleton of the bridge loomed over the black water of the Sound. It was a masterpiece of engineering, and apparently a monument to a crime I didn't know I'd committed. "If Alina is dead," I said, staring at the bridge, "then the syndicate doesn't have a lead anymore. They have a problem. They need that ledger to stay hidden, and they need the man who signed those permits to keep his mouth shut." "Julian, look," Clara pointed at the rearview mirror. 2 sets of high-beam headlights were closing in fast. They weren't braking. I turned into the gated site, slamming the SUV through the temporary chain-link fence. We skidded to a halt near the edge of the pier, where the massive concrete pylons descended into the depths. "Get out," I commanded. We ran onto the catwalks, the wind whipping at our clothes. Below us, the water churned, cold and unforgiving. We reached the center span, a place I knew better than my own living room. I knew which bolts were loose. I knew where the shadows were deepest. "Give me the drive, Julian," Clara said suddenly. Her voice had changed. The trembling was gone. She was standing at the edge of the catwalk, the wind blowing her hair back, looking remarkably like the woman I'd buried. "Why?" I asked, stepping back. "Because I can end this," she said, reaching out her hand. "I have a contact, someone higher up than the syndicate. If I give them the ledger, they'll wipe your name. They'll give us a new life. We can leave tonight. No more motels, no more ghosts." I looked at her wrist, the birthmark, the crescent shape. It was perfect, too perfect. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and played a recording from our home security system, the one in the studio that Clara thought was broken. "I've got him exactly where we need him," the voice on the recording said. It was Clara's voice, speaking 3 weeks ago. "Julian is signing the final permits tomorrow. Once the bridge is cleared, the syndicate can move the shipments through the construction lane. He has no clue. He's too busy being the perfect husband." I looked at the woman on the catwalk. The woman I buried was the gentle soul, wasn't she? The woman in the casket? That was Clara, the real Clara. The woman standing in front of me didn't flinch. A slow, dark smile spread across her face, the smile of a predator who had finally been caught but didn't care. "You were always so smart, Julian," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Clara was weak. She was a coward. She spent her life drawing flowers while I was building empires. She didn't deserve a life this good. She didn't deserve you." "You killed her," I whispered, the weight of the truth crushing my chest. "The hit and run, you weren't the target. You were the driver." "I needed her ID, Julian. I needed her ring. And most importantly, I needed her to be the one the syndicate thought they killed. As long as Alina is dead, I'm free. And as for you, well, a grieving widower's suicide off his own bridge would be such a tragic end to this story." She pulled a small, sleek pistol from her waistband. The wrong funeral wasn't a mistake. It was her victory lap. She had invited herself to her own sister's death to make sure I believed the lie. But there was one thing she didn't know about structural engineering. Sometimes you design a bridge to hold weight, and sometimes you design it to fail. The wind howled through the steel girders of the Meridian Bridge, a mournful sound that seemed to scream for the woman I had truly loved. Alina, the monster wearing my wife's face, stood 10 feet away, her pistol aimed steadily at my heart. "It's a long drop, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth I had mistaken for love. "But don't worry. I'll make sure the note I leave in your car is poetic. Something about how you couldn't live without Clara. It'll be the perfect ending to our little drama." I looked at the USB drive in my hand, then out at the black, churning water. "You think you're the only one who can play a part, Alina? You spent months pretending to be a wife. I spent 10 years as an engineer, and there's one thing every engineer knows: you never trust a structure that hasn't been tested." Alina laughed, a sharp, cold sound. "What are you talking about? Give me the drive." "I knew you weren't Clara the moment I walked into the morgue," I said, my voice steady. "Clara had a small scar on her left thumb from an X-Acto knife accident in her studio 3 years ago. The body and the casket didn't have it, but you don't have it either." I realized then that my wife wasn't in the box and she wasn't at home. She was the one the syndicate was hunting, but I didn't know you had already killed her until I checked the studio's hidden cameras. Alina's eyes narrowed. "So why play along? Why bring me here?" "Because the syndicate is already here, Alina. And they don't like being cheated." From the shadows of the massive concrete pylon behind her, 3 figures emerged. They were dressed in charcoal overcoats, their faces illuminated by the flickering construction lights. In the center was a man I recognized from the ledger, Mr. Vane. Alina spun around, her gun shaking. "Vane, I have the ledger. Julian has it. I was just getting it for you." Mr. Vane didn't look at her. He looked at me. "Mr. Thorne, you told us on the phone that you'd deliver the person who stole our data. You said you'd provide the thief and the ledger in exchange for your immunity." Alina's head whipped back toward me, her face contorting in shock. "You called them. You set me up." "The ledger on this drive is fake, Alina," I said, tossing the USB into the wind. It vanished into the black abyss of the sound. "The real ledger, the one with the names of the judges, the politicians, and the Vane board members, is already in the hands of the federal prosecutor. I sent it an hour ago." Vane's expression didn't change, but his eyes turned predatory. "You just signed your death warrant, Thorne?" "Maybe," I said, stepping toward the edge of the catwalk. "But I'm not the one standing on Section 4B, Alina. Remember when I told you I signed off on the permits?" I lied. "I marked this section as structurally unsound 6 months ago. The bolts were never torqued. The supports are held together by nothing but gravity and hope." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small industrial remote, the one used for testing the bridge's vibration sensors, and I just turned on the resonance frequency. A low, deep hum began to vibrate through the catwalk. It started as a tingle in the feet, but within seconds, it became a bone-shaking roar. The steel began to oscillate, the bridge literally trying to shake itself apart. "Julian, stop it!" Alina screamed, losing her footing. "This is for Clara," I whispered. I hit the final button. The magnetic clamps holding the temporary walkway snapped. With a sound like a freight train crashing, the section of the catwalk where Alina and Vane's men were standing gave way. There were no screams, only the roar of the wind and the sickening splash of heavy steel hitting the water. I stood on the stable part of the span, watching the ripples disappear. Alina, the woman who had stolen my wife's face and ended her life, was gone. The Vane Syndicate's leadership was at the bottom of the sound. I didn't jump. I walked back to my car, the sirens of the FBI and the Coast Guard beginning to wail in the distance. I had given them the evidence, and I had given them the location. But there was one final secret I never told the police. A month later, I sat in my new apartment in a different city, far away from the rain of Seattle. I opened a small envelope that had arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photo, a picture of a sunset in a small village in Italy. On the back, in a familiar, delicate script, were the words, "Thank you for the switch, Julian. I'll see you in our next life." I looked at the photo and smiled. The woman I buried wasn't Clara. The woman on the bridge wasn't Clara. Alina had a twin, yes, but she didn't know about the third sister. The triplets had been separated in 1988. Clara had found her other sister, Sarah, months ago. They had played the ultimate game of chess against Alina and the Syndicate. Clara was alive. She was waiting for me. And the funeral? It was the only way to make the world believe the Thorne family had been wiped off the map. In a world of mirrors and shadows, the truth is the only thing that can set you free or bury you alive. Julian Thorne lost everything to find the truth, only to discover that the greatest secret was the one he helped keep. If you enjoyed this twisted tale of twins, betrayal, and the ultimate pro-revenge, please subscribe to Hidden Secrets. We dive deep into the mysteries that stay hidden in plain sight. Hit that notification bell, leave a comment about which sister you think was the smartest, and remember, trust your blueprints, but never trust a birthmark.